Miller's Grove, Illinois, a town of 3,200 souls surrounded by endless fields of corn and soybeans. A place where people left their doors unlocked, where everyone waved on Main Street, until one autumn afternoon, when a 12-year-old boy vanished, an illusion of safety was shattered forever. It was October 14th, a Friday. The school day had ended with the usual routine, chatter in the hallways, kids filing onto buses, and the baseball team lingering for practice. Jacob Hall, a bright-eyed sixth grader with sandy hair and a ready smile, was the team's pitcher. Around 4:15 p.m., Jacob said goodbye to Coach Miller and climbed onto his bike. He was last seen pedaling down the access road toward County Road 14, the route he always took home. When he didn't walk to the door by 5 o'clock, his mother Ellen assumed he'd stopped at a friend's house. By 6 o'clock, her unease turned to fear. By 7 o'clock, she was dialing 911. Within hours, dozens of volunteers gathered under the amber glow of street lamps. Parents, teachers, and classmates fanned out across fields and creek beds, calling Jacob's name into the darkness. Sheriff Tom Leslie, a lifelong resident himself, coordinated the search. For 3 days, Miller's Grove operated on adrenaline and dread. On the morning of October 17th, searchers spotted something in a drainage ditch. Jacob's silver bike, its front tire bent. A smear of dark, rust-colored blood marked the seat. The town gasped in horror. Investigators immediately suspected a random act of violence, a predator passing through. But if that were the case, why hadn't anyone seen a struggle? As fear tightened its grip, the investigation turned to Jacob's relationships. One name surfaced again and again: Derek Mays, a classmate with whom Jacob had clashed. Witnesses described an argument behind the gym 2 weeks before. Derek had shoved Jacob, who retaliated with a punch. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit advised that childhood conflicts can escalate, sometimes with deadly consequences. Agents interviewed Derek and searched his family's property. But Derek's alibi, a weekend trip to his grandparents, checked out. With no evidence linking Derek to the disappearance, the case stalled. Frustration grew as weeks passed without answers. The turning point came when agents reviewed grainy security footage from the school's parking lot. At 4:20 p.m., Jacob could be seen walking his bike toward County Road 14. He glances over his shoulder and waves. A blue pickup truck, parked near the field, idles in the background. The shape behind the wheel is indistinct, but the vehicle is familiar. Investigators confirmed it belonged to Greg Hall, Jacob's father. When questioned, Greg claimed he'd spent that afternoon at the hardware store. But phone records showed his device pinged a cell tower near the school at 4:30 p.m. A search warrant for Greg's truck turned up a small, reddish stain on the passenger door frame. Forensics identified it as Jacob's blood. Faced with mounting evidence, Greg Hall confessed. His story unfolded in fragments, each piece more devastating than the last. Greg had discovered Ellen was meeting with a divorce attorney. He was terrified she planned to leave and take Jacob. In a moment of desperation, he decided to confront his son after practice, to persuade him to stay with him if the marriage fell apart. He insisted he only wanted to talk. But when Jacob refused to get in the truck, the argument escalated. Greg grabbed his arm, and in the struggle, Jacob hit his head on the dashboard. Panicked, Greg drove to a remote culvert, convinced Jacob was only unconscious. When he returned hours later, Jacob was dead. Greg said he placed the body in a shallow depression, covered it with brush, and drove home as though nothing had happened. On November 10th, investigators recovered Jacob's remains where Greg described. The coroner confirmed the cause of death was blunt force trauma. The town was stunned. The man they'd trusted, the father who cried on television pleading for Jacob's return, had caused his death and hidden the truth. Greg Hall was charged with involuntary manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering. At trial, he wept as he described his remorse. But for Ellen Hall, the confession destroyed any trace of love she still held for him. She sat in court every day, expression vacant, listening to the details of her son's last moments. In Miller's Grove, nothing felt safe anymore. Parents who once waved their children off on bikes now drove them everywhere. The cornfields and ditches that had been playgrounds became reminders of loss. Each October, The middle school baseball team hold a memorial game in Jacob's honor. His number, 7, is painted on the outfield fence. Sheriff Leslie, who had known the Halls for decades, said later, "Sometimes evil doesn't look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a father who loved his boy in all the wrong ways." Greg Hall is serving a 20-year sentence in Illinois State Prison. Ellen Hall moved away, unable to bear the memories. But in Miller's Grove, Jacob's story endures, a reminder that even in the safest places, tragedy can take root when fear turns to desperation. If you like, I can help you adapt this further, expand it with dialogue, more procedural detail, or shape it for video narration. Just let me know.